Welcome back to the Matt Bliss Hour. Chapter number 10. Gonna be a good one. Somewhat of a short one. Now, would have been a good chapter to lead into the lab that we were going to be doing for this because there was multiple tests that we were going to perform. We're not going to perform a lot of them, but we were going to have some of them involved in the lab for you to perform. And there's some specialized pieces of equipment for low back functioning or flexibility. Some of this you can actually do on your own, and you can actually see towards the end how maybe you could do some of this on your own, and I'll explain that at the end as well. Because one little insight into the background of this, I actually recorded the end video to this before I'm recording this. So getting into the chapter, this chapter is going to be looking at low back functioning, going to be looking at joint flexibility, range of motion, maybe some conditions that could develop as we get older, maybe because of injuries, maybe because of gender and age. Could be possibilities there. So, and we'll be looking towards the end then at what the tests can be to look at the flexibility of certain joints. So I would like you all to enjoy the online lecture. Chapter number 10, Assessment of Flexibility and Low Back Function. All right, so looking through this chapter, it's a fairly short chapter, but it's a very important chapter because obviously flexibility is very important throughout our daily lives, as well as low back functioning. And the reason is because a lot of disabilities stem from low back problems and also lack of flexibility. So we're going to look at factors that will influence flexibility, relative flexibility, assessing the flexibility, and also range of motion. What is range of motion? The hip, knee, ankle, upper extremity, the spine, as well as looking at the hamstrings. And the hamstrings sometimes are kind of the most common one that people will think of flexibility, kind of like touching your toes. And one of the more popular tests that is used for that is a sit and reach test. Okay, so what is flexibility and why is it important? So it's required for many activities of daily living, the ADLs that we discuss. So impaired flexibility throughout the body can negatively affect low back pain, or LBP, if you will. And what that means is it could exacerbate some of that. And that low back pain prevalence, 80% of the amount of pain or problems that somebody may have is going to stem from low back pain or low back issues. And some of that is going to be coming back from impaired flexibility. Approximately 25% of adults actually report some type of pain in the lower back within the past 3 months or within a 3-month period. So it is quite common, and it's actually a source of disabilities, and it's a source of loss of work and obviously then income. So flexibility is the capacity to move the joints freely through the normal range of motion and through the entire range of motion. Again, going back to one of the other chapters with the strength training, a full range of motion, not just half squats or half rotation or range of motion of that particular joint. It's the full range of motion. Now, there's going to be some specific aspects that are going to influence range of motion. What joint is actually involved in that particular motion? Some of them are more limiting than others. Others have a wide range of motion, and you can move in multiple different directions through multiple different axes and planes. So that goes into the joint shape as well as the position of the bones and the ligaments and all that good stuff, as well as the muscles, tendons, the ligaments, all the stuff that is inside of the joints and that make up the joint. And also the activation of muscle spindles, as well as the stretch reflex that we were looking at in exercise physiology. I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the beginning of the semester, but keep in mind that we do have that stretch reflex. Now, the functional range of motion at all of the joints is going to be causing efficient body movement. If there's a limiting amount of range of motion that we can have within a certain joint, the movement or the movement capabilities of the muscle are not going to be maximized. So we're going to be limiting ourselves in either performance or even just simply daily living activities or activities of daily living. Okay, some factors that could be affecting your range of motion. Age and sex, going to be the big ones. Range of motion is going to decline quite a bit with age, especially as we get into our 40s and really when we get into our 50s and 60s and 70s. Some of that is going to be due to inactivity, but also it could be because we're gaining a little more weight. At the same time, we're less active. We're sitting around a little bit more. And our joints do start to break down over time. We'll get into some conditions, or at least one common condition that could arise as we get older. So on average, about 0.6% of a decrease in range of motion per year for females and 0.8 for males. So males tend to have a more steadily decreasing amount of range of motion throughout our life cycle. So the shoulder and the trunk flexibility losses are actually greater than losses maybe in the elbows and the knees. And some of that has to do with if you look at the shoulder and the trunk, it can move in multiple different directions. So there's a lot more parts that are kind of intertwined together. And the elbows and knees, they're practically just moving in one direction. It's either flexion or extension. So it's a lot less complicated of a joint. Although it's still complicated, but it's less complicated from a structural standpoint. The lumbar flexion and extension losses are greater than the loss in the lumbar rotation. However, posture is a very key factor in maintaining a good range of motion, especially within the lumbar region. And this is where some of the low back pain can actually stem from. In fact, as I'm sitting here right now recording this video, I'm trying to maintain a decent posture while I'm speaking into the microphone. I'm in a regular kitchen table chair, and it's quite uncomfortable. So I've actually put a little bit of padding on top of it. That way it gives me at least something to feel comfortable. That way I'm not moving around nearly as much. And I'm trying to maintain a straight back. And if you look at the two pictures here, this individual, this is how sometimes I am at my desk, and this is how I should be. There should be at least some support of the back, a little bit more comfortable chair. And even if it's the same exact chair, you can still have poor posture. Just because the chair is expensive and has all these adjustments doesn't necessarily mean that somebody could be using it properly. So if you're hunched over all the time, that's going to be causing a little bit more stress on the lower back. Now, this is somewhat difficult to fix sometimes, because sometimes at least immediately and acutely, it can be a little bit more comfortable to slouch over. You're a little bit more relaxed. But maintaining that posture throughout the day, and even when you're standing, it's going to be more beneficial in the long run to try to reduce some of those bad things that can happen, the pain and the discomfort that can be arising in the lower back. All right, other things that could affect range of motion. Disease is also a major factor in this. And arthritis is a very big issue, especially as we get older, at least in one of the forms of arthritis. Now, they affect the articular cartilage of the joint, so they're avascular. So they're looking at there's some damages that are occurring from non-blood flowing tissues. Now, when the cartilage is damaged, it may be replaced with fibrocartilage or some type of bony spicules. So there's a diminishing movement that can occur. It's not like the original tissue that was there. It is now a scarred type of tissue that is formed. And sometimes this can be quite painful, and obviously it's limiting the range of motion. Now, the two common types of arthritis are rheumatoid arthritis and osteoarthritis. And we'll go into those differences here. Rheumatoid arthritis, of the two, it is the less common, but rheumatoid arthritis is a little bit more common in women than it is in men, however. But again, it is still the least common form of arthritis between rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. This is typically diagnosed somewhere between the ages of 25 and 60. So even at a younger age, somebody could be diagnosed with this. It is an autoimmune condition, meaning that the body is attacking itself. It's attacking its own tissues, its own cells, and it can also be polyarticular, meaning that it can affect multiple joints, just not one or two. It can affect almost all the joints throughout the body, at least 5 or greater. It can also result in stiffness as well as decreased range of motion because it's attacking the tissues and it's breaking them down. And it could also be one of the root causes of chronic low back dysfunction in some individuals. Now, osteoarthritis is the most common, like I said before. So about 90 to 95% of the arthritic cases are diagnosed as osteoarthritis. Normally, it's because of aging. So after the age of 40, on average. So as we get older and older, our joints just naturally break down over time. And even just starting at in your younger 20s, at some point, somewhere between your 20s and 30s, maybe even 30s to 40s, again, you've reached your peak. I mentioned this before. You've reached kind of your peak of what your body is, basically reached your prime. And from there, the body will start to break down. Scarring will happen with inside of the body. And the joints are going to be affected by this as well. And this will cause some potentially pain, discomfort, as well as limited range of motion. Another cause of this might not necessarily be from age, but it could be caused and at least maybe exacerbated by a previous injury or some type of mechanical derangement, maybe a dislocation or something like that. So it doesn't have to be because of aging, but it can be because of the injury or some other injury that has occurred earlier on in life. A prime example of this, and I always think of, because I was a catcher growing up in Little League and all throughout high school, is that I always thought about Major League Baseball catchers. How many times they're standing up and then getting down, crouching down, and then standing up and crouching down, standing up and crouching down. How many thousands upon thousands of times are they doing that throughout the year and also throughout their career? And how much stress they're placing on their knees throughout their entire career. I mean, a lot of those catchers will have multiple surgeries, maybe in the off season and after their career. A lot of them may have knee replacements later on. So that particular joint in that particular position in that sport is going to have a little bit more wear on their knees than maybe like a right fielder. Not to say that a right fielder can't have problems with their knees, but it's probably not going to be stemming from constantly standing up and crouching down and standing up and crouching down. Now, osteoarthritis, women are affected a little bit more than men, but all joints are susceptible, no matter if it's men or women. The knee and the spine do tend to be the most common, and that's where you'll start to see more knee replacements as people get older and older, as well as low back functioning start to decrease and the amount of pain in the lower back begin to increase. Some of that could be stemming from an osteoarthritic condition. Now, exercise can help increase blood flow and nutrient diffusion to some of this avascular cartilage. Even though it's avascular, it still needs some type of blood going to it. It needs to get some type of nutrients to it so it can still maintain a healthy amount of tissue and cellular growth and cellular structure. So exercise can help to decrease the amount of osteoarthritis and also reduce potentially some of the pain. Now, some of the exercise itself, depending upon what the exercise is, how stressful it is, and how often it is performed, and maybe even the type of equipment that is being used, could actually be one of the causes of the breakdown of the joint. Now, reduced activity results in continued deterioration of that particular joint. So again, physical activity and exercise, keeping moving is going to help to decrease the amount of deterioration within the joint. All right, loss in bone mass or bone mineral density. And this is known as osteoporosis. We've seen this before. I've talked about it before, not only in this class, but other classes you may have had me in. It is very common in females, or at least it's much more common in females, especially after menopause. It can also be a higher risk for younger females, ones that have eating disorders, and going into the idea of the female athlete triad. So those with small body size, diets that are low in calcium, as well as individuals that are physically inactive. So keeping up with a weight-bearing exercise is going to help increase the bone growth and maintain bone structure. So there needs to be some type of stress on the body, the actual physical stress being placed on the body that puts stress on the bones, and that causes them to react in a way where they're going to try to adapt to that stress and keep up with the rigid structure that they need. So some of the common sites then would be the hip, the wrist, as well as the vertebrae are going to be common sites where these osteoporotic bones are going to be developing. Okay, going into some testing for flexibility. So flexibility can be assessed either quantitative or qualitative approaches. Sometimes you can just tell if someone is flexible or not. You don't have to get them on a sit and reach box, or you don't have to measure anything. You can just tell that somebody is flexible, just maybe the way they are moving in a sport or moving on stage. Maybe if you're looking at a play or maybe a ballet, something like that. Now, looking at the knee in particular, it can be measured in a couple different ways. So the degrees with a goniometer, measuring the joint angle, and the goniometer can be used in multiple joints throughout the body. So noted in terms of full range of motion or exhibiting mild, either moderate, as well as either significant limitations, depending upon what the goniometer may say, or could even just eyeball it as well. And investigating length of the specific muscles that cover two joints, as well as any postural assessment within the lower body. So one of the tests that can be performed here with the knee is the Eli's test. So the prone, individuals laying prone, you have a quadriceps test, and you're just simply measuring how far away, essentially the heel, is coming to the hamstring and just determining how far away they are. Now looking at maybe the flexibility of the ankle, you have the straight leg of foot raise, in which the individual will stand up against a wall or at least some sort of structure where they can stand up straight, put both feet flat on the ground, and then raise one of the toes, keeping the heel on the ground, and then just simply measuring how far the toes come up off the ground. The back scratch test. This one's always kind of a fun one because you'll have a wide range of individuals within a class that some of them can basically shake their own hand behind their back with both hands, either the right hand above the shoulder or coming up from above, or if it's behind below. But then you have other individuals in the class that may be something like this, where they might be 3, 4, 5 inches away. And in fact, this can vary even within the individual themselves. And what I mean by that is there's two parts to this test. Is you need to do a right arm over and you need to do a left arm overhead. So you're going to be switching your arms to where the right hand is either going over top or the left arm is going over top. And some people, they can actually on one side say this individual is, they're about maybe about 3 inches away or so from touching their fingertips. And that's what the measurement would actually be. Fingertip to fingertip is just trying to measure that shortest distance. But if they would switch this and put their left hand over and their right hand underneath, they may be able to overlap the fingers. And it's, again, in individuals where in one hand they can basically shake their own hand, and the other one, they're not even touching their fingertips. So again, looking at the different range of motion between the different positions of the joints. So just not looking at one particular joint in one side, but also both sides of the body, in both knees and both elbows and both shoulders. All right, tests of range of motion in trunk and hip flexion. So one of the common ones here is fingertips to the floor or performing a toe touch, as well as a sit and reach test. A sit and reach test is probably one of the more common methods. It's easily performed, although there's a specific piece of equipment that can be used. It can be just essentially a box and a measuring tape. That's really all you would need for this. So you're measuring hip joint flexibility, but not low back range of motion. So it may increase the risk of spine injury if the hamstrings are actually tight and increase compression forces on the intervertebral discs, which is going to potentially be causing some back pain, especially low back pain. So again, being fairly careful with some of these tests. They're not 100% critical. They could be a good starting point for somebody, but they're not 100% critical. Sometimes it's just beneficial to ask them, hey, can you touch your toes, or can you tie your own shoes without sitting down? So with this test, the shoes should be off because there is a little bit of a distance there, half inch, an inch, depending upon how much of padding there is in soles of the shoes. So slow, steady pace. It should not be a ballistic type of movement where they are rapidly pushing forward and rapidly stretching forward. Normally it's performed in 3 trials, and you're going to be taking the best of the 3 trials and then comparing that best trial to the norms of age as well as gender. So this is a typical sit and reach with a sit and reach box. They are barefoot, or at least have socks on in this case. Now, what is not shown here is what the starting position is. The starting position most often is the individual will actually be flat up against the wall with the arms stretched out just like this, overlapping, and they will reach out as far as they can, just with their back up against the wall. And that's going to be the starting position. And there's going to be a little indicator here that they can move freely in a track that is on here. So once that starting position is found, that is your 0. And then they will slowly move forward and push that indicator until they cannot move any further, and then stop, and then take that measurement. Reset it, reset the 0, and then perform the test again, and then perform the test again after that. So that is the sit and reach test. Then there is the chair sit and reach test. So this test is having one leg straight out in front. You could also potentially do both legs, but normally performed in one leg at a time, and just reaching down to see how close they can get to their toes. This one is a modified back saver sit and reach test. So this one might not be placing as much strain or stress on the lower back. So you're just simply having the individual sit on a bench with one leg up, one leg on the floor, and they're pushing forward and stretching forward to see how far away they can get. In the beginning, or the 0 then, is going to be at the knee in this case, and just seeing how far they can reach forward. Okay, that was chapter number 10, assessment of flexibility and low back function. Let me know if you have any questions, and you're going to see my lovely face here in 1 second. Just trying to maintain my good posture while I'm sitting here. Sometimes I have bad posture while I'm sitting here in the chair trying to record this, and also when I'm doing some of the videos, the Zoom meetings and whatnot with you guys. So with that, that was the assessment of flexibility as well as low back function. So this chapter is one of those chapters where it is very important. It's a fairly shorter chapter, but it is fairly important because it gives you an idea of some of the tests that can be performed. And this is a very limiting amount of tests. And if we would have had lab, there was still a limited amount of tests that we were going to perform. There are multiple different tests that can be performed to determine flexibility of all the joints of the body. It doesn't matter what joint it is. There's some type of flexibility test for it, and to determine how much of a maybe decrease in range of motion somebody has because of whatever reason it may be. Could be an injury, could be old age, could be out of shape, depending upon what it is. But also it gives an idea too of how critical posture can be. And again, sitting up in a chair, even in class, sometimes it's very difficult to maintain good posture for that hour and a half, potentially even 3 hours if you're sitting there. It's tough to do that, but still very important for maintaining good, healthy, low back functioning throughout the life cycle. So, and then some of the tests towards the end of the chapter, a few of those we would have covered in lab. And in fact, you can do those on your own if you would like. The sit and reach is not really that hard to do. Now, you just need a reference point of that 0, and then being able to have some sort of an indicator. And somebody could actually position something in front of you. So you might need a helper if you want to do the sit and reach by yourself without maybe a sit and reach box, or you could build one maybe even out of a piece of, a cardboard box, Amazon package, or whatever you have laying around. So those are just some of the tests that can be used to determine flexibility, also low back functioning. So if you have any questions, you have any concerns, please let me know. And remember, maintain your good posture. That should be a catchphrase. This is Matt saying, keep your good posture. It's 5 a.m. I just got up like 4 hours ago. I think I need some coffee.